Where do I even begin with Tetris? It's one of the world's most popular games, and it was at the heart of one of the most dramatic conflicts in video gaming. It spawned a genre and has a vast legacy, and I'd say it stands right alongside Super Mario Bros. And Dragon Quest as one of the most important games published on the Famicom. It wound up being the 10th best-selling Famicom cartridge. Also, this version's terrible. I'll get back to that though. Now, I don't want to do a 15-minute overview on the battles surrounding Tetris, but it's actually kind of important to the Famicom version. The game was originally designed by Soviet programmer Alexei Pajnatov, and the original versions were for microcomputers, not PCs. And like most microcomputer software, it got passed around pretty widely. To make a long story short, a bunch of people who didn't own the rights to Tetris sold the rights to publish Tetris to other companies, and this got divided up by platforms and regions. The computer versions were the first ones to Western markets, and they were enormous hits. Big enough hits that it was getting mainstream news coverage. So the console ports of Tetris were highly anticipated because Tetris was already really well known. Two of the computer game publishers sold the rights to different companies: Bulletproof Software and the console game branch of Atari, Tengen. Atari wanted to sell their version in Japan, but Bulletproof Software was selling their own version. And so Atari went, "Hey, you don't have the rights to the game." And Bulletproof Software quickly realized they bought the rights from someone who didn't have the rights to sell it. But then Bulletproof Software realized that Atari didn't buy the rights from somebody who owned Tetris either. And Bulletproof Software was making Tetris for an upcoming gaming platform by Nintendo. So Bulletproof Software got the backing of Nintendo to go to Moscow to negotiate the rights, while simultaneously, and I do mean simultaneously, Atari rushed to Moscow to try to lock in the rights. The end result was that Nintendo got the rights, and Bulletproof Software got a license from Nintendo to keep publishing the game. Atari had to withdraw their version and recall it. And as one more weird twist on this, the owner of Bulletproof Software, Henk Rogers, he's currently the head of the Tetris company. Now that we have a framework, let's take this all the way back to the Famicom version. Because of the rapidly changing rights situation and the popularity of Tetris, there are multiple revisions of the Famicom Tetris, all with different rights screens. The rarest of all seems to be my copy, something I specifically sought out. It says that the game was made on license from Tengen. So my cartridge was made in that month or so period in which Bulletproof Software thought Atari owned the rights to the game. And there's multiple revisions of each box as well with the different rights on it. One more curious thing about the Famicom release of Tetris: apparently it didn't sell well. Or at least it didn't place on the sales charts in the first week. Not a good sign for a holiday release. But apparently it was getting strong word of mouth, because rather than selling out quickly and then potentially coming back into stock like other Famicom games, Tetris built up momentum. By January 1989, it started showing up on the sales charts, and then it just never left. It was even the best-selling Famicom game for a few weeks in 1990. I think this might be a record for how much background I have to give a game before I get to the actual play. But it's Tetris. I can get through the gameplay in less than a minute. You've got a well, and tetrominos drop from the top. Tetronomos being the technical term for a shape made up of 4 blocks. These fall down until they come to rest on the floor or another block, and your goal is to build horizontal lines of them. The more lines you complete with a single piece, the more that you score. And the biggest score comes from a Tetris, when you drop a straight line down a shaft and complete 4 rows at once. In the Famicom version, you rotate the piece by pressing up or down on the D-pad, and drop it by pressing A and B. Yes, you absolutely will misdrop a lot. This was a result of trying to adapt a computer version's controls rather than make something that functioned on the Famicom. The Bulletproof Software version also goes to a score tally when you complete a level, and it's unskippable. And when you start the game, you can choose a level, and that'll put junk bricks in the well for you to get rid of. And that's literally everything you need to know about playing Tetris in a minute. How do those pieces behave, though? To answer that, I'm ranking all of the Tetris pieces from worst to best. And obviously, mirrored versions count as the same one. Number 5, the square. While it has its uses, the square is just too blocky. You have to have a space prepared for them, and getting a lot of squares on a stack that isn't ready for it can result in some really ugly piling. Number 4, zigzag. Though often maligned because it's a bad piece to start with, once you get going, it's rare that you don't have a spot for one of these. The biggest problem with the zigzag is that, like many siblings, the mirrored versions don't get along with each other. Number 3, L. The L block often finds itself as the face of Tetris. It's a piece with some good flexibility, but it really shines when you can prepare a spot for it to just slide in. Number 2, the straight piece. A controversial pick, I know. The straight piece is the only piece that can complete a Tetris, but that also makes it a bit of a prima donna. It never shows up when you want it to, and it has a bad tendency to show up when you can't use it. It's mainly its potential for big scoring that gets it this high on the list. And that means number 1 is the T-piece. A real team player of a Tetronimo. You're never sad to see a T-piece appear, there's always a good spot for it. And even in those rare cases where you have to leave it with a bit of an overhang, the T-piece still makes it easy to slot something in. You may not be able to score high with it, especially in the earlier versions of Tetris, but the T-piece is going to be the foundation of your good stack. Tetris launched a whole genre of puzzle games. The puzzle piece falls down a well and you need to clear them away before it fills things up genre, which admittedly is a long name for it, but considering how many games copy it directly, it's kind of necessary. And the early 90s were a bit of a wild west for Tetris sequels. The companies that got the license were able to make their own sequels, and so a lot of different Tris games came out. We're going to see 3 more of them before the Famicom's done, though none of them are good as classic Tetris. Tetris has a weird situation where it received 3 ports to Nintendo's 8-bit machines. 2 for the NES, and 1 for the Famicom. And this Famicom port is by far the worst of them. In fact, it's bad enough where I'd say it's not a good version of Tetris. The controls are awful, there's no way to do a quick drop instead of a hard drop, which makes playing at the lower speeds excruciating. And stopping the game to do a score tally is just annoying. It also gives you 3 lives for some reason. There are no lives in Tetris. Bulletproof Software would make the other Nintendo Tetris ports, and those are much, much better playing. I've gone back and forth on whether Tengen Tetris or Nintendo Tetris is the better version, and right now I think I'm coming out on Nintendo's side. I think it just plays a little bit better. Famicom Tetris, though, it's just historically interesting, not something I'd want to play.